Welcome to CCED Today at Michigan State University Center for Community and Economic Development. I'm Jennifer Bruin, and I'm going to be your host today, and I'll be interviewing Dr. George Berghorn. Hi, George. How are you?
Good, Jen. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here, and I'd like to talk to you about your co-learning plan that you're working on. I believe the title is P3 Pathways from Prison to Prosperity, a framework for training ex-offenders to be entrepreneurs in legacy cities.
What's up?
Maybe you could give us a quick overview of what the project is about, and then maybe we'll get into more detail.
Yeah, that sounds great. There's a lot of different places, I guess, that I could start with talking about the problem because it is a rather large and complicated problem. But the bottom line is we incarcerate more people in this country today at any point than we've ever incarcerated in the past. We're somewhere approaching 2.4 million people in prison or jail throughout the United States. And the reality is between about 95 and 98% of those people will be released at some point in time. And we know from research that the number one indicator of ex-offenders being successful in not returning to prison is finding stable long-term employment. Now, as we look at declining urban core cities, such as places that we have here in Michigan, like Flint and Detroit, we know that while in any location, ex-offenders often have the deck stacked against them in terms of finding viable employment. When you now lay that on top of what's happening in these urban core cities where there's less employment for anybody, ex-offenders really have a doubly or triply difficult situation. So one of the ideas is, can we train ex-offenders while they're still in prison and then support them as they return back to these legacy cities in becoming entrepreneurs and finding their own economic opportunity, their own job opportunity in places where job opportunities, frankly, are scarce for anybody. So the project is really focused on trying to understand what are the critical success factors, what are those things that need to happen from the perspective of the Department of Corrections, from the perspective of community service agencies, from the perspective of potential employers or workforce investment boards, as well as the ex-offenders themselves, to define and promote a strong and successful entrepreneurship program for these individuals.
So 17 years working in sustainability, and you're now the principal, actually the founder of Berghorn Group, which also works with a lot of sustainability types of issues.
That's right.
But you're a senior advisor for green prisons, so you're probably the ideal person to actually ask a lot of questions about how do we bring these people back into the workforce. I know that it's probably not part of your teaching curriculum because you will be teaching at MSU this fall, but how do we kind of incorporate that whole sustainability? I know that's been something how do we incorporate that into getting these people back to work or starting their own businesses?
And sustainability, in a broad sense, really, I think, provides some interesting opportunity as we think about both entrepreneurial opportunities and direct to work for an employer opportunities for ex-offenders. If we look nationally, and I don't mean to single any jurisdiction or any state agency out, but if we look nationally at what prison industries programs look like and education and jobs training programs in correctional facilities around the country, we find many dated programs that are still being offered. Oftentimes this is a result of budget shortfalls, limitations in new funds to promote newer educational programs. So supplies and equipment and classrooms are often older. Some of the skills that are being trained are possibly less viable skills in 2015's economy. But we also, interestingly enough, find that as some correctional institutions try to align jobs training programs with sustainability initiatives that are occurring at the correctional facility, there's often a mismatch between how offender training is handled and what the viability of those jobs that offenders are being trained in will be once they get out. And I'll give you an example. A few prisons around the country are actually using offenders to operate their powerhouses. So they're operating boilers, they're operating generator facilities. But the reality of an offender getting a job or an ex-offender getting a job with a utility company in this country are very slim. Typically a felony might as well be an absolute bar to employment from many utilities in this country. So the goal is to say, okay, how can you look at a sustainability project, whether it's an energy efficiency project or a water conservation project, and tease out those important skills that not only make for a good jobs training program, but make for adequate employment opportunities upon release for those individuals. So one example that immediately comes to mind is with a company that I do some work with called Solar America Solutions, who manufactures, designs, and installs solar hot water systems around the country. They now package a training program for inmates along with their solar thermal installations at correctional facilities, whereby they have inmates doing a lot of the installation work as these systems are being installed at correctional facilities. They take a skills training curriculum, basic skills training curriculum, so there's a classroom component of this as well as the work experience. And the company that they work with to do the installations has actually offered jobs to 2 inmates at one of their facilities in Ohio upon completion of the program and upon their release. So it's not enough to just have a training program, obviously. The training program has to be very closely tied to what a viable job opportunity might look like. And again, that's where the entrepreneurship angle can come in as well. There just may not be a viable job out there in a community where an ex-offender is being released. So instead of saying, yes, you've been trained to do one very specific job that may or may not exist upon release, arming these individuals with a boatload of skills and possibly certifications changes some of that dynamic quite a bit.
Now, wouldn't most employers be very hesitant to bring these people on board? I mean, do you talk about in your co-learning plan or any of your research addressing kind of those basic needs first? Then there might be some therapy or counseling or some drug rehab. I mean, I know they've been in prison, but still there could be some issues that are kind of there, and those employers that are, willing to hire them may still be curious about this person that they're going to hire.
Absolutely. There's quite an array of supportive services or wraparound services that have to accompany any type of program like this. And where we've seen some growth in correctional facility training programs is in programs that also include some sort of cognition therapy or cognitive behavioral type therapy along with the skills training component of the work. Of course, it's not enough for that to stop at the point of release. So I'll point to a colleague of mine who has a wonderful program. And again, it's not necessarily an entrepreneurship program. It's a jobs program, but you asked the question about employers. It's a jobs program in Indiana, in Indianapolis, called Recycle Force. They are a large recycle center, do a lot of e-waste recycling as their primary activity. Greg Kiesling, who runs that company, only takes on high-level ex-felons. So these are
the worst.
Yeah, the worst. These are folks who've committed violent crimes, oftentimes murder, attempted murder, manslaughter, things like that. And he brings them into a program that not only gives them a job and gives them jobs training and certifications in forklift operation and first aid and CPR and OSHA industrial safety, but includes those soft skills training components both in the classroom but also in the design of the program. Older ex-offenders are assigned as peer mentors in the program, and they work directly with his newer employees that are closest to their point of release. And those individuals help the newer entrants into his company with many of the issues that are faced by ex-offenders when they're released from prison. So these are the individuals that are helping set the example, provide some outlet for frustration or things that would have been handled differently inside the prison environment that can obviously no longer be hired outside. So, for skeptics that are hearing me talk about this and say, okay, well, this is all, we in green prisons where I work, we talk about, the hug a thug program, and, it's sort of the negative, if you just hug a criminal, everything will be better. And we're realistic enough to know that that's not the case in and of itself, by itself, and it takes all of these pieces to work with it. But in the case of Greg's program, Marion County, Indiana, so Indianapolis, has about a 50% recidivism rate. So about 50% of the inmates that are released from prison will eventually go back to prison. His program, which only targets the highest level felons, potentially dangerous ex-felons, only has a 25% return to prison rate. So I would say that's proof in the results of how a strong program with the right service mix can create real change, both as a business model and as a social and community model.
Wow. So he's making an impact in his company's making an impact in that particular area. Do you know if he's kind of consulting other businesses in the state of Indiana or in Michigan, or is that an option for him?
I don't know specifically if there are individual companies that Greg works with, but Greg is a well-known entity to us in Green Prisons and that organization, and we promote the work that he's doing to our national network of individuals. So at least in a passive way, the work that he's doing is getting out, and of course our resources are always available to individuals that want to pick those resources up and use them.
And lately the discussion on the news has been about maybe not having so many prisoners in prison. So this is kind of falling in line with this too. I mean, this movement to maybe help folks to get into work, and these are obviously the convicts that are probably on the lower end of their crime. They haven't done anything that's too violent or too, but it seems like this would make sense. What types of programs are you aware of that maybe are workforce related? Like, does Michigan Works getting involved in this kind of thing in our state and communities here?
Yeah, Michigan Works has been involved with the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative, the MPRI program, since it was conceived of under Director Pat Caruso, who's now 2 directors ago from the Michigan Department of Corrections. They're involved post-release, so they offer some of these wraparound services. They offer some job placement, those issues. But my assertion and the assertion of a lot of the people that I work with is it's not enough to just take a person upon release and start working with them towards some productive endpoint. There was a great piece in the New York Times, I think it was fairly recently, at least I saw it fairly recently, and the title of the article was something to the effect of, "You've just been released from prison, now what?" And it's about a California-based nonprofit that employs a couple of ex-felons to go to prisons around the state and literally pick up ex-offenders upon their release from prison and spend the day with them, just getting them, taking them to Target to buy clothes. I mean, for some people that have been away for 30 years, it's just the simple act of going into a Target store or any big box store is challenging for them. Being in a large crowd and having to interact in a different way than they might ordinarily be used to acting is a very big part of reentry. And so they're taking this approach that you can't just dump people out of prison and expect things to go perfectly or expect things to go well. Right. Remember, as you asked in your question before, many employers are hesitant to hire people with felony records, particularly with violent or longer term incarceration type felonies. So the deck is often stacked against a lot of these people, and again, the research bears it out. The number one factor in reducing the return to prison rate is long-term stable employment. So we can sort of put our heads in the sand and say, well, geez, people didn't go to prison for too many speeding tickets. People are getting what they deserve. But remember, 95 to 98% of people are getting let out of prison. They're coming back to all of our communities, your community, my community, and we are doing a disservice to these individuals by not having some type of economically viable options available for them. We're doing a disservice to ourselves and to our own communities at the same time.
The cost is tremendous.
The cost is tremendous. So in 2008, City of Flint So I know this is seven-year-old number, but I just want you to think about this number for a minute. In 2008, the city of Flint, or I should say the inmates whose primary residence at the time of incarceration was the city of Flint, cost almost $36 million per year. That's the incarceration budget for those individuals. Genesee County as a whole at that same point in time had about a $60 million a year role in the corrections department's budget based on the inmates that came from Genesee County. So the city of Flint represented about 60% of Genesee County's incarceration cost. There have been previous studies, I'm sure people who are tuning into this are going to be familiar with this term, but there's this concept of the $1 million block. This was a study that was done in New York City, but it's replicated itself other places now, that there are streets, one block by one block areas in New York City and other urban areas where the cost of incarceration for the people who are coming off of that block is $1 million per year. And so now we start talking, that's just what the state is paying. But now we can start talking about what's the lost economic opportunity on those blocks, what happens when kids grow up without a parent, and what's now the intergenerational impact of that economic opportunity. These things all start to grow on each other. So again, it's easy, and I grew up very conservative, very sort of tough on crime. I get that, but we can all sit around and say, yep, folks got what they had coming to them, lock them up, throw away the key, forget about it. But they're coming back to our communities, and if we don't do right by helping folks out, that's just dragging our own communities down in the process. It just doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. So the one skill set that they're learning down in Indiana has to do with recycling.
Correct.
Maybe give us a few other examples. Where are some other companies doing different types of skill training?
Yep. And to be fair, they're actually learning more than just recycling in Indiana. They've spun off some other business opportunities down there. But yeah, we'll stick with recycling being a key down there. State of Ohio, there's programs related to aquaculture in correctional facilities in Ohio. Same as you go out west, there's programs related to aquaculture. Again, the challenge may be who does, in a given area, who typically does aquaculture. Typically it's the state running fish hatcheries. Difficult for those individuals to get employed by the state because of their criminal backgrounds. Although there is some private aquaculture, of course, some private fish farming and fish growing operation. But there's aquaculture programs going on across the country. There's native plant propagation and restoration programs going on around the country. Fort Lewis, Washington, it's a big military base in Washington State, has had almost all of their rangeland restoration plantings. Those were almost all grown by correctional facilities in the state of Washington. So, you have opportunities with that. There are opportunities. The state of Kentucky has started to work on some green collar job opportunities in a 10-day entrepreneurship institute that they run there, focused on things like weatherization and energy efficiency and green construction and some opportunities there. Again, you have the challenge of if someone is canvassing in your neighborhood and they want to do weatherization and they're knocking on doors, if it's someone that you know to be an ex-felon, how inviting are you going to be of having that person come into your house? So I always sort of draw the distinction between work that can be done inside of a residence versus work that can be done outside of a residence. So to that end, a particularly successful program has been in California. I believe it came out of San Quentin prison, where inmates have been trained on how to consult with homeowners and property owners on changing their lawn landscaping to permaculture.
Oh, okay.
And so there's about a dozen individuals that have been through this program that have been released from prison, and they sort of act as independent agents under this broader program umbrella, and they go around the Bay Area and they've done permaculture conversions of front and backyards for people throughout the Bay Area. So again, when you're on the outside of a home, it's a little bit of a different story. I think people tend to be a little more accepting. They're a little less concerned about, we're letting someone who came from a prison program into our house versus the backyard. And it's been successful. It's shown signs of success.
So what companies do we have in Michigan that are doing this, that are hiring, ex-convicts? Do we have any?
Yeah, sure. There's companies around the state that are hiring ex-convicts. Here in the Lansing area, probably most notably is Peckham Industries, who hires a variety of difficult to employ and difficult to place individuals, whether it's because of a criminal background, because of cognitive impairments, things of that nature. Peckham's been pretty successful in this area. But my interest and my focus really goes back to the Detroits and the Flints and the Gary, Indianas and the Clevelands and those cities across the country. It's easy when you're in a part of a state that's got a pretty well functioning economy to find some socially responsible companies that are willing to make the investment in people. My question becomes, what happens when you go to cities and geographies that don't have companies, period, don't have employers, period? No one's getting a job.
Right.
And in that kind of a buyer's market for an employer, if I'm looking at two equally qualified candidates and one has a felony on their record and one doesn't, and jobs are scarce as it is, who am I going to employ?
Right.
I can almost write that prescription with a guarantee. So I'm far more interested in this idea of entrepreneurship as you get into communities that need a cadre of skilled workers, of people that are generating economic activity in their own zip code and returning that money into their local economy, or being a part of raising a new local economy.
Right. It might be as small as maybe a landscaping company or a lawn service
Absolutely.
that just kind of sprouts up, not to use a pun,
Yeah.
right there in Flint, led by a foreman that's an ex-convict.
Absolutely.
And also, trains the others, kind of that mentor idea that you were mentioning.
And the one thing, and I can't tell you, I couldn't list all of the programs that are taught in Michigan prisons individually, but one that has struck me as being very high quality and very successful in the state has been the construction training program that exists in correctional facilities across the state of Michigan. Much of the work is done in partnership with Habitat for Humanity. So if you go out to Ionia at the prison complex out there, wall sections are built that are then given to Habitat for Humanity, and they're used in rehabbing or building new homes across the state. So the construction jobs training piece has been pretty successful here in the state, and that's another, maybe you wouldn't have an offender starting a general contracting business because there is quite a bit of startup that's involved with that, but a handyman service, a maintenance service, those are some different opportunities. Lawn care, as you said, either a standalone opportunities for somebody, or if all they can do when they get out is get a minimum wage part-time job, something that can at least augment what they have as they're in the process of getting on their feet. But I think the entrepreneurship component reaches beyond just those individuals who will go out and start their own business. Because think about the population at large of the U.S., of Michigan, of Lansing, however you want to look at it. In the general population, not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur.
Right.
There's some segment of people who want to do it and will pursue it and do it. Same goes. I mean, the prison population is a microcosm of society. If people think that folks that are locked up in prison are any different from your neighbor or the person down the street, you have it wrong. Prison is a microcosm of society. So again, you can't expect that everybody will have the means or the interest to become an entrepreneur. But one of the things that entrepreneurship training teaches, is self-empowerment and self-determination. Now, as a skill, as a soft skill, even if somebody doesn't want to go and start their own business, you've now taken a person and given them a strong skill set to set them up for more success as they try to reintegrate into society. So even for folks that don't want to start up a business, I would say that an entrepreneurship model is important.
Helps with feeling defeated, maybe.
Absolutely.
To overcome that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, feel a little empowered and a little more confident and start up their own company.
Absolutely.
I know you and I were talking one day about a lot of these guys that are in prison maybe were entrepreneurs, but in the wrong line of work, and that's what got them there. So they still could apply that same sense, the guys that are interested, or the women that are interested in starting a business.
Absolutely, and the circle of people that I run with that does work in prisons, we sort of also joke about the fact that when you go inside of a prison, you find a thriving underground economy. A lot of folks in prison have a hustle. They're doing something to supplement, their income. Whether it's no one's trading money. There's no cash inside of. Well, there's not supposed to be cash inside of prisons, but they're trading for commissary items, trading for, one. I mean, I've seen this. One person on a cell block, all he does is irons uniforms for other inmates on that cell block, and they might trade for a commissary item, or maybe they do laundry. I've seen that too, where someone will do laundry on the tier, so they don't have to put their stuff in the prison laundry. So maybe the guy who irons will trade to get his stuff washed by the person who does laundry. That's the innocuous stuff. I mean, we also know there's a booming economy in less innocuous practices,
savvy,
but it's savvy, and that's, not to underscore it, and again, not to get too much into this sort of hug a thug idea, but there's a certain independence of thought and boldness to take an initiative that you can't say that you see with everybody. So there are some indicators definitely that people are predisposed to doing that sort of thing.
So how would you advise communities in Michigan if they wanted to help emerging companies led by ex-convicts or someone that's not? I mean, I don't know if Greg isn't an ex-convict down in Indiana,
Greg's not, no.
But how would they provide sort of the first steps?
So there's actually a really fascinating community and economic development tool that's being thrown around right now. It's this notion of a social impact bond. So often with social programs, whether it's programs for ex-offenders, homeless directed services, youth and family directed services, oftentimes we put the focus on intake. Oh, we need to have a funnel with a wide mouth to bring as many people in, a safety net, right? You hear about that all the time. We need the safety net for people. And then you start looking deeper at some programs that are out there and start to ask, what are they actually accomplishing? What are the impacts? What are the measurables coming out of those programs? And there's a lot of money that gets directed to programs that one might argue don't have large amounts of impact. Well, the idea with a social impact bond is to look at those entities, whether it's a community service agency, business, public-private partnership, but to look at those businesses that within a given social services sphere have had strong track records of success, and use private investors to back investments into those agencies, organizations, firms, set a measurable target, and once that target is released, the public entity repays the bond with some amount of interest paid back on the bond. The theory being it costs less to serve these populations than to continue to operate a homeless shelter or a prison or a shelter, those types of facilities.
Interesting.
So there's been quite a bit of buzz about social impact bonds, particularly because there's two pieces of legislation at the federal level right now. One co-sponsored by Republicans and Democrats in the House, one co-sponsored by Republicans and Democrats in the Senate. Social Impact Projects Act, I believe, is the name of the legislation. The idea of that bill is to authorize the federal government to give up to $300 million to states and municipalities that want to try to create these social impact bonds. So that's one thing that communities can do. Create those public-private partnerships that work, and then seek those types of financing opportunities, those social impact bond financing opportunities. Frankly, the other thing they can do, though, is work with companies that have a vested interest in hiring individuals who've been released from prison. Identify what the needs of the community are. Find a company who's willing to help support those needs and can create some jobs around them, and try to key their activity around what is most needed in the community. Again, it makes no sense to train it makes no sense to train aquaculture technicians, fish farming technicians, to go back to Flint, where are we doing fish farming? That's not a need.
But you were going to talk about this a little bit. There may be an opportunity.
There may be some opportunities, and this is
aquaponic.
yeah. And so thank you for bringing this up, because it's illustrative. It's illustrative of the point. Through a co-learning plan that was done through CCED last year, the University of Michigan has this after house concept where abandoned homes are taken down to the top of the foundation. The basement is then used as more or less a thermal battery to drive a greenhouse. A greenhouse is erected on top of the foundation, and now you're getting into this idea of community gardens and fresh produce being brought into food desert areas, lots of different social benefits and community benefits for doing this project. Well, CCED Flint has now picked this project up, looking to pilot it in Flint on 2 structures, but part of the interest in Flint is to work with communities and groups of ex-offenders to see if this would be a viable opportunity for people who've been in prison to now find whether it's employment through some third-party organization who will drive and support the creation of these after houses, or it's an entrepreneurial opportunity as well.
Could be.
Absolutely could be. And actually, over the weekend, this is sort of, I guess, breaking news, but over the weekend, Muskegon County has also expressed interest in looking at this concept as well. So once you know what that community need is, you can start to explore ways to bring that training program inside the fence, and then to work with community service agencies to continue that training and supportive services outside the fence as well.
And educate the companies or businesses that are currently located in your community about the benefits of maybe hiring
That's correct.
this population.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because they probably don't understand it, how to even begin. And
Absolutely.
so local economic developers maybe need to be as educated as possible on how to help companies to start down that path.
Absolutely.
And your co-learning plan will help them.
That's right. And and also bear in mind, the other key piece of this is, as you talk to correctional agencies around the country, corrections departments are typically one of the top 3 or 4 most expensive budgets within any given state. And so there's always a lot of pressure on these agencies to reduce their operating budgets year in and year out. And so as a result, things like job training programs and prison industries programs often feel, a disproportionate share of the burden and how to cut the budget. So training programs have either stagnated, or in some cases training opportunities have decreased. Teachers aren't being hired once they retire. And again, that's something you see kind of repeating itself in various places across the country. So one of the other big needs is for these public-private partnerships, these alignments of businesses in the community, once they clearly identify a need, to work with an organization, and like a workforce investment board would be a good example of an organization to work with, where you've got a local office of a state entity, but they need to work within that construct as well to put some money back into jobs training in the correctional facility as well, and target that job training to those opportunities, or work with correctional institutions to show them how they can do something. They can take on a training program that actually generates revenue inside the facility.
Oh yeah.
I can give you another good example of that, and it's not in the same jurisdiction as Greg's Recycle Force program in Indiana. This is now going into Shelby County, Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee. But they've got a recycle program at the Shelby County Detention Center that for a long time was just run using a baler that was donated to the prison by a recycling company. They had a few inmates that would bale up the cardboard and the aluminum from the institution, and then the local recycling company would come and pick up the pre-baled stuff for free and take it off and sell it. And this company was loving this, because all he had to do was give a baler to a prison, and the inmates became free labor for him to make money on resale of the bundled recyclables. Well, once they realized what was going on, they now have a corrections officer who only manages the recycle program. They bought a new baler. It's a very large baler. They've got a large number of inmates assigned to the recycle program, and they're making somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 a year in revenue in operating their own recycle program inside the facility, which is now going outside of the facility to collect office paper from offices throughout Memphis and Shelby County. So they took something that was a liability, figured out a way to generate revenue from it, add more inmates into the program. Now, if you had a Greg Kiesling in Memphis, upon release, those individuals would be pre-trained, predisposed to go right to work for that recycling operation. So there's an opportunity for a business and a community group in Shelby County or in Memphis to take a leadership role and connect a behind the walls and an outside of the walls activity together.
Wow. So I'm hoping that there are a lot of individuals that have been talking to you, learning about this, because you're building sort of a network maybe around this. I mean, having Greg and maybe Greg talking to Tennessee, and then I'm hearing Washington and some other places in Michigan too. So is that the Green Prison Group? Okay, so they're...
Green Prisons really tries to be a resource to correctional facilities, or correctional agencies, I should say, around the country to really talk about what are some best practices that have happened in other places, what can be done to bring that best practice to your specific agency or jurisdiction, and really try to help promote those best those best practices moving forward.
Right.
It connects very well with this co-learning plan, because really all this plan is just creating a framework. What were those critical success factors that drove the ability of programs around the country to make an impact in this area, and now have a single stop resource to say, here's what the framework is, here's what the program might look like in your jurisdiction to be successful, with the understanding that not every component of a framework is going to fit in every location around the country. But it's a tool for people to be able to say, if we want to do an entrepreneurship program in our jurisdiction, our county, our state, what are the things that we need to lay out? What are the things we need to think through? Who's done this before? Are there some case study examples of where this has been successful? And in one location, maybe it was the public-private partnership that was the success. So let's talk about how that public-private partnership was constructed and contributed to a program success. In other locations, it might be how the community identified a strong need within the community and moved that into a training opportunity for ex-offenders. How can we replicate that in other places where we're going? That's the idea of the framework, is to really become a resource for places that are looking to do this work.
Yeah. And your co-learning plan will be complete in September. And we'll see you at the summit. You'll be presenting on your material and all of your research.
Yeah.
And following that, it'll be on our website.
That's
so all of the state of Michigan will get their hands on it, and communities will be hopefully running with it and starting their own programs, or helping communities, or other communities and counties and companies to do this type of work. So I think we've run out of time today. But thank you very much for coming in. This was very good. It was very interesting. I'd like to thank the U.S. Department of Commerce and Economic Development Administration for helping us financially to support this program. And thank you once again, Dr. Berghorn, for coming in.
You're welcome.
If you'd like to find out more about Dr. Berghorn's co-learning plan or about the REI University Center, please visit reicenter.org.